The sugar diet gets you shredded!
What I think I'm finding on the sugar diet is that it makes me just want to go.
Literal sugar, like Sour Patch Kids for breakfast.
Get ripped! Insane weight loss! Sugar! Sugar!
Sugar fasting is absolutely amazing. And it's not a fad, it's a revolution.
In today's video, I'm going to share the 4 key problems that you need to know about the sugar diet that both Mark Bell and Cole Robinson aren't talking about. And at the end of the video, I will show you the real reason people are seeing weight loss with this sugar diet. Now, before we jump in, if you would like to work with me directly to lose body fat, not your muscle, and keep it that way for the rest of your life, without an extreme diet like the sugar diet, I just reopened a limited number of new spots for my exclusive coaching program. Now, in the coaching program, you'll be able to directly speak with me 7 days per week and get my personalized guidance to rebuild your health. So head over to MikeFave.com to grab your spots before we have to close the doors again. All right, so for the first 2 problems with the sugar diet, we're going to watch a short clip of Cole Robinson, the originator of the diet, tell us how he sets up the sugar diet.
Hey, fatty! The sugar diet gets you shredded! Sugar fasting for 100 days in a row. Pure sugar, 0 fat, trace protein from whatever's in the fruit you're eating is gonna get you ripped. Nothing's gonna get weight off faster than pure sugar with this high energy level. Nothing.
To be fair, in the podcast that Cole does with Mark Bell, he mentions he's playing a character. It is like an act, and he does blatantly say this, so he's pretty straight up about what he's doing here. Now, in terms of what Cole is mentioning there's a couple problems with the overarching frame. The idea is, and what he talks about, is you're going to get shredded and lose weight as fast as possible. And I don't think that that's necessarily the goal that a lot of people are looking for. I do think people want to lose weight fast, but what I think people are more looking to do is lose body fat fast. And the way that the high sugar diet is set up, it could lead you to a circumstance where you actually start to lose a large portion of your lean tissue, which will put you in a worse place when you actually lose that weight. You want to be in a setup, a dietary setup, where you are losing body fat, maintaining your muscle mass, if not building your muscle mass, while also the last piece here is actually recovering your health. Because losing weight by itself doesn't just mean that your health is getting better. You could be improving your health while you're losing body fat, but you could potentially be worsening things like hormonal function, micronutrient status, microbiome, etc., if the diet is set up poorly. This leads me into problem number 1 with Cole's setup. He talks about having trace proteins from fruit. So this means that the diet is going to be too low in protein overall. Now, why is this a problem? So first things first, if you are in a caloric deficit, you want to have adequate protein intake, with research talking about 1.6 grams per kilogram per day. And I personally like to shoot for 0.82 grams per pound per day. Or if you are obese, 1 gram per pound of lean body mass per day, so that you can maintain your muscle mass as you lose the weight. This is extremely important. So too low protein already, I think there's a high chance that people will lose their lean body mass. Now, the next thing is protein is important for things beyond just muscle tissue and lean body mass. It's important for your bone mass. It's important for your immune function. It's important for your hormonal synthesis for things like thyroid hormone and for the catecholamines, adrenaline, noradrenaline, dopamine. And it's also important for enzyme production in the body. A variety of the or all of the enzymes in the body are made of amino acids, and we get those amino acids from the protein that we eat in our diet. So this high sugar, low protein diet, even if you lose weight, if you're losing it from lean body mass because the protein is too low, I think you'll be in a worse spot on the back end, kind of like the people who are using GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic and are very gaunt when they are done with their weight loss because they lost all of that lean tissue. So we don't want that to happen. Now, the next problem with not having enough protein in the diet is that there will not be enough satiety. Why is this? When protein is broken down inside the digestive tract, it releases amino acids and it releases peptides. The amino acids and the peptides stimulate the release of certain hormones like cholecystokinin, like GLP-1, like peptide YY, and like ghrelin. These hormones are extremely important for your satiety. They allow you to feel full after your meals, and they allow you to not overeat or fall into circumstance where you have to eat too frequently. And I just want to show you here very briefly how this plays out in the intestine. So when we look here, what we can see is the peptides and the amino acids, right? These are, the protein is broken down into these components. Then what we have is the intestinal cells here. And what the intestinal cells do is when they sense these peptides and amino acids, they release these hormones, cholecystokinin and GLP-1. And what these hormones do is they stimulate not only satiety, but they also optimize digestion. They stimulate the digestive processes. And then they also optimize insulin sensitivity. So we want these things to be released. We want this signaling to occur. And without adequate protein, this will not happen on this very high sugar, low protein diet. Now, the second major glaring issue with the high sugar diet is that it is too low in fat. The first major problem is that if you don't have enough fat in your diet, you'll cause negative effects on your digestion and on your liver function. Fats trigger the release of bile acids into the small intestine. And these bile acids help you absorb the fats as well as your fat soluble vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. So if you don't have fat and you don't have the bile acids, that absorption can be impaired. So you can create the micronutrient deficiency there. But then the bile acids are important for clearing out the intestine of bacteria. So you don't want bacteria in the small intestine because then they're going to be competing with you for the absorption of your food. And I've seen quite a few clients who go on a very low fat diet develop digestive issues because they don't have enough fat and they don't have that bile acid release. The next component is the fats, when they trigger the bile acid release, help the gallbladder to empty. So if you don't have enough fat in the diet, you actually develop a circumstance where you get gallbladder sludge or you get gallstones. These gallstones and the gallbladder sludge can create issues down the line with digestion and with liver function and also with gallbladder function, potentially leading to a surgery. Following this, if you don't release bile acids from the liver on a regular basis, you can impair liver's detoxification processes. Why is this? The liver actually drops the metabolites that it's detoxifying into the bile. And if the bile is not released into the intestine because the fat isn't triggering that release, then it stays in the gallbladder. And then you can't actually have the fiber bind that bile acid and pull it out and optimize the detoxification processes. So not having enough fat can impair liver detox. And then the last thing is fat is exceptionally important for delaying your gastric emptying. So what happens is when you eat fat, it slows how fast the food drips from the stomach into the small intestine so that the small intestine has enough time to absorb those nutrients and that the enzymes released in the small intestine can actually digest the food and you can get as much out of your food as possible. Fat is important with that satiety because it does induce the release of the hormones like cholecystokinin, GLP-1, and peptide YY. So we want to have adequate fat and adequate protein in the diet so that we have satiety throughout the day and so that our digestive processes and our liver function and our muscle mass are all optimized while we are losing body fat specifically, not our muscle tissue. Now, the next major piece, the next problem with not having enough fat in the diet is that it can absolutely nuke the hormones. It can nuke your hormonal profile. There's a variety of studies that have looked at the effects of low fat intake in men on testosterone. And when fat intake is dropped, what you'll typically find is that testosterone decreases. Now, in these studies, they don't even have fat intake as low as this high sugar diet does. And so in my personal experience, as I just mentioned, and I've seen this with many young guys I've worked with, right? I have guys in their early 20s, late teens that I've worked with where libido and hormones and a hormonal profile, all the morning wood, these different symptoms completely go out the window when fat intake gets too low. It's a huge problem. And if you're somebody who has more muscle mass and who is more active, if you are not an exogenous steroid hormones like Mark Bell is, this becomes an even bigger problem in terms of hormonal function. So we have a meta-analysis here from Whitaker et al. The meta-analysis is titled Low-Fat Diets and Testosterone in Men, a systematic review and meta-analysis of intervention studies. And basically what they say low-fat diets appear to decrease testosterone levels in men, but further randomized controlled trials are needed to confirm this effect. They say men with European ancestry may experience a greater decrease in testosterone in response to a low-fat diet. And then inside this meta-analysis, what they basically show is that low-fat diets lower total testosterone, they lower free testosterone, and they lower dihydrotestosterone, and they lower urinary testosterone. So what you're seeing is if the fat gets too low in the diet, you don't have enough of this substrate to produce the steroid hormones effectively. And then you see a lowering of all the steroid hormones in men. And then also there's studies in women that also show an effect on the female sex steroids like estradiol and things like this with low-fat diets. So these are important things to keep in mind. If you're going to embark on a high-sugar diet, it may have a negative impact on your hormonal function, again, even if you're losing weight. Now, for the third major problem with the high-sugar diet, we're going to take a look at some Instagram posts by the fitness influencer Mark Bell, where he shows us how he sets up his sugar diet.
Mark Smelly Bell here talking about the sugar diet. I want to tell you exactly how I do it. 30 grams of fat, 100 grams of protein. I weigh 210 pounds as of this morning, and the carbohydrates are unlimited. I'm really going after it with everything I got in terms of having juice, fruit, and even straight sugar, honey, and just trying to get it in. How many calories I'm eating, I don't know, because I'm not a calorie counting. Catch you guys later.
Mark mentions that he's eating about 100 grams of protein. He's eating 0 to 30 grams of fat per day, and he's eating as much carbs as he can handle. Now, for reference sake, I'm about 195 pounds. My body fat percentage is about 9 to 10%, at least the last time that I've had it checked. And then Mark is about 210 pounds, and I think he's a little bit leaner than I am. So his calorie targets here are going to be a bit higher than mine, and his macro targets are going to be a bit higher than mine. But we are relatively close. We'd be relatively close in our targets overall. What I want to show is my specific caloric targets on my current diet are about 170 grams of protein, 450 grams of carbs, 100 grams of fats. We're going to use this with a caloric target of 3,380 calories. We're going to use this as a baseline here to look at if I was to set up a sugar diet along the lines or along the way that Mark has set it up, what are some of the problems that I would run into? And so this diet is already high in sugar, right? 400 to 450 grams of sugar per day. It's all entirely from 100% fruit juice and fruit for me. I think that's the best way to go because it's much more nutrient dense than using Sour Patch Kids and jelly beans, which we'll see in just a second. And also, there's not very much starch here, right? So I have 416 grams of net carbs per day, so that's without fiber, and only about 7.2 grams of starch. So it's about 400 grams of sugar per day, and it's all coming from the pineapple, papaya, cantaloupe, this 100% fruit-based jam, no added sugar, and then some 70 to 85% dark chocolate. So when we look at Mark's setup, I'm going to extrapolate using mine. I removed all of the protein sources, the vegetable sources, except for the 10 ounces of steak, so that I can recreate Mark's 100 grams of protein per day. And then there's no added fats here anymore. So the fat is about 20 grams per day, which falls between that 0 to 30 gram range that Mark was talking about. Now, in order to get close to my roughly 3,300 calories per day, if I wanted to do it with whole foods, with fruit juice and 100% fruit, I would have to have a gallon of juice per day, and I would have to have 4 pounds of papaya and cantaloupe melon per day to hit my caloric target. Now, obviously, this isn't very reasonable. This would be very difficult to do. Even for me, I'm used to having high amounts of carbs on a regular basis, and I don't think I could eat this much fruit and this much juice in one sitting, and I definitely don't think I could do it 4 times per day. Now, something that Mark mentions in the video is he is not counting his caloric intake. He is not looking at his energy intake. He's like, oh, I'm just eating as much sugar as I want, and I'm losing weight, and I don't need to count calories. And I bet that he is in a caloric deficit to some extent because logistically, this diet is extremely difficult to set up if you were to set it up with whole food sources here, right? If you were to set it up like this, you will have to use granulated sugar, honey, maple syrup, and these different components just based on the sheer volume of food that we required if you're using whole foods. So it's not very tenable. And this is why, besides, the other components we talked about, protein and fat, they're helpful to have in the diet so that you don't have to do things like this. Now, the next thing here is, despite this being a relatively nutrient-dense diet, right? It's topped off on a variety of the vitamins and minerals here. It's still going to be low in choline, still going to be short in biotin. It's still going to be short in the fat-soluble micronutrients, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. It's still going to be short in calcium. It'll still be short in sodium, but it does top off some of the other micronutrients. So this is still not a terrible setup from a micronutrient perspective, but it is very short and fat-soluble vitamins. And even if you were to supplement, because the fat is so low, I think it would be very difficult to actually absorb them appropriately. Now, the next setup, and we're going to look at an Instagram post here from Mark, is he's talking about his breakfast, and he's talking about using sources of sugar that are not whole food sources. And TLDR here, I think this is a terrible idea, even if you are losing weight with this diet, because maybe you're losing weight, but you are not necessarily improving your health this way. And so Mark says here, most important meal of the day, breakfast. What's not shown in the pic is a big old glass of apple juice, weigh 211 a day and continue to drop. This dang sugar diet seems dumb, but it's working. Remember, though, it's sugar in the absence of fat and even protein. So this was his breakfast here, was Sour Patch Kids and a bunch of jelly beans. So I've recreated this general setup here. If somebody was to try to run this diet, even in the podcast with Cole Robinson, Cole talks about doing a sugar fast that's only soda, which I also think is a terrible idea for a variety of reasons, including micronutrients. And so basically, if you look at this here, I've recreated the caloric intake to get to 3,300 calories. What we see is this is about 800 grams, 766 grams of carbs. And we have, what do we have here? Half a gallon of Coke and then 20 ounces of Sour Patch. So more than half a gallon of Coke and 20 ounces of Sour Patch. And then essentially the nutrients in this diet is horrific. It's terrible. The only way that Mark or Cole would be getting nutrition in this diet is from the steak. So I think that running a sugar diet in this way is probably the worst possible way you can do it. And I would highly recommend incorporating sugar sources that are heavily refined like this. I would recommend using fruit sources and 100% fruit juices. And I obviously would recommend having adequate protein and adequate fat. And one last thing, Cole runs the diet without any protein, right? Trace protein from the fruits and the sugar sources. This is a zero nutrient diet. So I would highly recommend against doing a soda fast or using these sources in any capacity as a major source of carbohydrate. I've been running high sugar diets myself for 10 years, and it's only fruit, 100% fruit juice, dried fruit, things like this. People I work with do tubers and these different components. I would not recommend using these sources in any capacity because they're nutrient poor. And also this diet is like very difficult to run on a regular basis because this volume of these sugary things, I just think a lot of people wouldn't be able to keep up with and eat. And that I think would create a caloric deficit. And I think that's largely what's leading to weight loss for people on this dietary setup. So the fourth and final problem with the high sugar diet or the sugar diet is that it can lead to issues with your oral health. So I'm going to tell you a quick story here. When I first came out of low carb, out of keto, paleo, all this type of stuff, and I entered the bioenergetic sphere, I was doing the granulated sugar and milk and then having tons of orange juice and a low-fat diet. When I ran this diet, I absolutely destroyed my teeth. I eroded away all the bottoms of my teeth. And I remember like really freaking out at one point in time when I was doing this. And so I think oral health with this diet will be a huge issue for people. Now, there's a couple reasons why. We already talked about the low micronutrient content of these diets depending on how they're set up. But the fat-soluble nutrients like vitamin D and vitamin K are essential for proper oral health. And number one, the sugar diet is going to be short in those nutrients. And number two, even if you supplement them and have them present, absorption is going to be poor. The next thing is calcium and magnesium are absolutely essential for proper oral health, for the maintenance of the structure of your teeth. This diet is not very rich, depending on how it's set up, in both calcium and magnesium. So you're going to create micronutrient deficiencies that can actually lead to problems with oral health long term. The next component is the high sugars in the diet actually have a negative impact on a system called the hypothalamic parotid system. And what happens is the hypothalamus releases a hormone to the parotid gland that signals the saliva flow through the teeth to help remineralize the teeth. And when you eat high amounts of refined sugar sources, it actually shuts off this axis, this hypothalamic parotid axis. And then you don't get that parotid gland hormone, that parotid hormone that triggers the fluid flow through the teeth. And then this leads to degradation of the teeth over time in conjunction with not applying or with not having enough of those appropriate micronutrients to maintain the tooth structure as well. Now, the last piece here, this is just to mention really quick, this is resolved by having adequate amounts of protein in the diet, because one of the intermediaries of the urea cycle, carbamoyl phosphate, which is a product of protein breakdown, amino acid breakdown, actually stimulates the parotid hormone secretion again. So the low protein aspect is a huge problem with this here. And if you're using very refined sources like Sour Patch Kids or Coke, it's even worse for oral health than if you were to use whole fruits and things like this. Now, the next piece is the refined sugar sources, particularly from things like Sour Patch and from Coke, on top of the acids that are present in those things, can directly damage the teeth. The acids will directly damage the teeth. And then the bacteria can ferment those very refined sugar sources in the mouth and produce acids and form biofilms on the teeth, particularly bacteria like Streptococcus mutans, that will lead to destruction of the teeth over time. Now, using fruits is a much better option here because the fruits do actually have the polyphenolic compounds present, and the polyphenolic compounds are able, if we look in this graphic here, they're able to reduce the biofilm formation on the teeth. They're able to have antimicrobial actions against pathogens in the mouth like Streptococcus mutans, and they have anti-inflammatory effects on the gums and on the gingiva, so that you can minimize the development of like periodontitis or inflammation of the gums and the gingiva, and also that degradation of the teeth. So the fruit is helpful, but having the adequate vitamins and minerals and having the adequate protein in the meal, I think it can be quite helpful overall to minimize problems with oral health. And for myself, I still have a high sugar diet. I get asked this all the time, well, are your teeth messed up? No, my teeth have actually recovered since doing that, because I have the fruits and the juices first, and then I have the protein and the fiber, the cooked veg, and then the fats, typically macadamia nuts and dark chocolate afterwards, so that I can have that parotid hormone start to stimulate that fluid flow again. I have the polyphenol compounds present, and then I also have adequate vitamins and minerals present in my diet to minimize the breakdown of my teeth, so I don't actually have for any further tooth degradation. My teeth have been much better overall, but when I was doing that high sugar diet, it absolutely melted, like rotted the teeth out of my mouth. So to wrap things up here, why does the sugar diet work for weight loss? Number one, it creates an energy deficit. When you restrict protein and you restrict fat heavily, you get into a circumstance where it becomes very difficult to eat enough energy just from carbohydrates alone, just from sugars alone, to actually maintain your body weight. So you go into a caloric deficit. And this is especially the case if you are running a Cole Robinson type of sugar diet, where you're just eating very refined sugar sources and you have no added proteins and no added fats. You will automatically go into caloric deficit and you will lose weight. And yes, you could probably eat as much sugar as you want, but I think for most people, it's not going to be logistically possible to actually hit the carbohydrate targets on a regular basis when you're just limited to eating sugar. And so I think that's why people are losing weight. But again, I think this will come at the cost of your health. So you'll lose weight, but you can create new issues for yourself with your oral health, potentially with losing muscle tissue along the way, with your hormonal health, and then also with digestive health long term if this diet is run. So you can, I think this diet is helpful because it gets rid of the sugar fear for people, this fear that sugar is going to create all these problems. But I think that it takes it too far to the extreme. So I think you want to have adequate carbohydrate in your diet. You want to have adequate protein in your diet. You want to have adequate fat in the diet. It's not carbs versus fat. It's not keto versus vegan. We want to figure out how much of each macronutrient we need, what's the optimal amount for our health and for our goals, set up a diet reasonably, make sure we have all of our micronutrients covered, and then run from there with a sustainable plan that gets us to our health goals, and that we can then maintain long-term afterwards. And if you're looking for how you can set something up like this, you can check out other videos on my channel where I've talked about how to set up an appropriate weight loss diet, and I'll link those videos in the description below.